Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining our AI Meets Automation Paving the Way for Autonomous Networks webinar. We're going to give everybody a couple seconds to get in. Today, they've let me run host, so we're going to have a little bit of fun doing this together with Josh and myself, but some housekeeping to get us started. So everyone will be muted as a part of this, with the exception of your hosts. If you have questions, we'd love to respond to questions. There's a QA section in the bottom right of your screen. Please feel free to drop your questions there. We'll try and leave time to answer any as they go. After the the webinar's complete, we will be sending this recording out via email. And if you have any difficulties, honestly, the best way to handle that is usually to just leave the webinar and come back in, because all of this stuff is kind of plug and play and ready to go. So while we're waiting for folks to come in, we're going to launch a quick poll about AIOps and the future of AIOps, and excited to see your answers, and then we'll dive in. I love it too, Josh. This is exciting. He's my first victim as I get to play host, so we'll have a good time with it today.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. All right. So the poll is, are you realizing the value you expected from your AIOps tool today? Yes, it's helping me eliminate all of my duplicate alarms. Somewhat, it has helped me eliminate some alarms. No, it's not helping as we expected, or we don't have an AIOps tool. I'm excited to see the answer to this one. I think this is one of our fun polls. And as usual, we don't get to vote, so we're kept on the sideline. All right. We'll jump in and do some intros as soon as the poll is complete here. All right. So I guess I'll start being your host today. I am Ari Stowe, the Chief Operating Officer here at Resolve, and I'm excited to be with you again on an exciting webinar. And I'm super excited to have with us Josh, and I'll let Josh kind of introduce himself, and then we'll jump into talking about AIOps. So Josh, you want to give us a quick intro of who you are and what you're coming to talk about today?
You bet. Thanks, Ari. So guys, my name's Josh Kindiger. I'm one of the co-founders at Grokstream. Our product is Grok. And as you can imagine, Grok is an AIOps platform. Interestingly, a little bit on my background, just to kind of connect the dots. We've been kind of running the Grokstream thing for the last 8 or 9 years. But before that, I was actually one of the co-founders of Resolve. So, I've lived in this space with my partners for the last 25 years, ultimately looking to drive companies closer and closer to autonomous. So super excited to talk to you about that today.
Yeah, and to be fair, Josh, the original Grok, right? That's the fun part here. So
Yeah.
no confusion. All right.
Yeah.
So let's jump in. I think, today we really want to talk about AI ops and the journey to autonomous networks and autonomous operations. And so, I think historically a lot of folks thought about AI ops as like the very basic pieces of it, right? Like, correlation of the alarms, and that was kind of what AI ops meant to them. It's certainly evolved a little bit over the last few years. So Josh, why don't you give us like just a little bit of an overview of like what is AI ops today, and what is that journey to autonomous networks and operation look like?
Sure. So AIOps is actually a term that's kind of used broadly, right? And today we're going to be very specific in how we talk about AIOps because ultimately for us it's about kind of the bigger picture. It's about helping operations teams, network operations teams, IT operations teams, SRE teams, basically helping those teams detect or identify issues as quickly as possible and then help them fix them as quickly as possible, either prevent or fix. And that preventing or fixing basically is required. That's where the automation comes in. So, the two AI ops and automation together is what ultimately helps us drive as close to autonomous as we can get you.
So I think that's you like the point that you hit there that I always love to like dive in on is like historically AI ops was really about just like helping you see through the noise, right? And what I love that you said there, which I think is like such a key point of AI ops today, is it's taking you from operation to action. Like no longer is it okay to just like see the noise. It's like how do I take that next step, right? So I guess you've gone through that experience of like seeing the market really just be about like seeing the noise and putting a little bit of like order to the madness. Um, from the perspective of like that next step beyond correlation, uh, what's been the like biggest change in how Grok is approaching this today, or how how you see customers approaching this in pursuit of that like dark knock, autonomous knock?
Yeah. So one thing is I think that the space has kind of realized that the confusion around the term AI ops, what I mean by that is, there are a lot of platforms out there that aren't really using AI, right? They're using a rules-based approach or a tag-based approach or a topology-based approach. And, frankly, we've been doing that for 25 plus years, right? So I think the market has kind of, they've become aware of the fact that that's not artificial intelligence. And even with some of the analysts, basically kind of, reshaping our space and coming up with new words so that companies can't generically use AI ops. It tells me that everyone's moving in the right direction. I'm tired, frankly, of hearing people say that companies don't want a platform to be true AI, and they a lot of our competitors, a lot of the larger companies out there actually believe that they're still on this path where you have to write rules or use tags or use a topology. And when Ari and I talk, when we talk about this space, we're thinking forward to the future where it's not about managing more incidents intelligently. It's about eliminating incidents. It's about truly driving as close to autonomous as we can get you. And I think that the market's catching on. I think that companies are finally realizing that lack of true AI approach is not going to get them there. There may be value there, but it's never going to get you the full value that you expect. So that's some of what we're seeing in the market.
Yeah, so that kind of leads us to what the poll asked today, right? I was hoping to tease out of you that the rule-based approach and like kind of that historical thing. And I think this is, the poll results today, we see a lot of the answers were really that I mean over 50% of the answers, 60% of the answers were that it's helped me eliminate some of the alarms. And I think, this is going to be where we're kind of going now, is like why is AI ops struggling to help you realize that value? But I think this is a really like key point for me is the promises of what AI ops were, 5 and 10 years ago was really around like eliminating the noise. And I think to your point, like in that rules based system and the previous approach, that was difficult. I also think, I mean, at least until more recently, and certainly, Grok, you guys have always kind of had this path. It was really just about like seeing the alerts and alarms and not necessarily like preempting work to them. So it's a little bit about like the approach to this. So can you share, like, you've had lots of conversations with customers that you're speaking with that are replacing traditional AI ops tools or are starting fresh on their AI ops journeys? Like, what are some of the things that you see that trip people up as they start to go towards that autonomous network with AI ops?
So you're asking me like some of the challenges around, yeah, where it's
Yeah.
falling short. Perfect. So
Yeah, what
um,
where is it falling short, both from the tools perspective and also from a an implementation, a perception perspective, right?
yeah, perfect. So there are a couple, key areas, right? And these are all well known. The first one is data quality. Companies believe today that they need to have a high level of data quality, and that's because when you're using a rules-based or tag-based approach, that's required, right? But when you're using kind of a more well thought out true AI approach, then that's not as important. But data quality is an area where a lot of companies basically have, they feel like they're going to fall short if it's not required. That's because of the competitors out there. Another area is around integration and complexity. So, many of our enterprise customers will have, it's hard to believe, but 30, 40, 50 different integration tools, monitoring observability tools. Sometimes it's the same platform deployed across multiple environments, but they're completely separate integrations. And this creates challenges. It creates challenges for those companies that don't have an approach where as you onboard those new sources of data, you want to be able to integrate across those different sources and correlate across those different sources, right? So that's an area where some of the other platforms have kind of fallen short. One of the big ones is explainability. When we say artificial intelligence, it's scary, right? People today don't really understand. So, oftentimes we hear terms like black box even the word I hate most, which is, hey, Josh, this seems like magic, right? So, we've had to work very hard to kind of build that trust and kind of beef up explainability. To me, probably the most important one where platforms have fallen short is this fourth bullet, right? Which is, cost and value and time to value, right? So, a lot of the early entrants into the space would sell, this great story, and then companies would look up 12 to 18 months later and they've only kind of scratched the surface, right? And the reason for that kind of ties back to what we were talking about before, where, if you're deploying a tag-based approach or a rules-based approach, you're just never going to get all the way there. It's a lot of work. It's still very manually intensive. So, when you look out in the market, you talk to companies today, that have been leveraging some of these kind of first generation platforms, they're going to say that it took way too much time to see the value, that the cost that they're paying isn't, the value to kind of cost equation isn't adding up, right? So, I think that's a big one. And then the final one, and this is kind of relating back to our core differentiators, but we think they're falling short because there's a lack of AI, right? All of these companies are using tag-based approaches, they're using rules-based approaches, topology-based approaches, and in order to solve this problem holistically, to really drive as close to autonomous as we can get, it needs to just work. You need to be able to integrate into the observability tools, integrate into the incident management platform, integrate into the automation platform, and it just works.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I do think all of these are areas where the AI ops platforms I think are certainly falling short. I think the other piece to this too is that a little bit of what teams were looking to do maybe like their initial approach was that concept of like reducing the number of alarms that they're looking at, right, and getting that correlation and like, so even some of those rules-based approaches were helpful, but even I'm thinking, Josh, like with some of the customers that we've worked with, there are some of these customers that have taken millions of alarms with traditional AI ops down to hundreds of thousands of alarms. Those hundred thousands of alarms are still not actable by technicians. Like that's still too many alarms to deal with. And so I think like the concept of expecting AI ops to help you trim down what you're seeing in the alerts and the alarms you're dealing with is good. But where I like a lot of what you guys are doing and what we're doing with tying, Grok's AI with Resolve's automation is really around taking that AI uh knowledge to the next level, right? It's not just about correlating alarms, it's about identifying patterns. Like one of my favorite examples that I see in your guys' demos and when we talk to customers is like starting to identify the things that maybe weren't necessarily alarm worthy but were a prerequisite to an alarm happening later, right? And starting to identify every time we have this outage, we have this blip 2 or 3 hours in advance. And so instead of just let's correlate my alarms and make it easier for me to enact, you're actually taking that like preventative step, right? Identifying the pattern and preventing that from happening in the future. So it's not just about crushing and consolidating alarms and alerts. It's about making a better environment for you and your team. I guess, can you talk a little bit about that? Because like I think that's a bit of a shift from AI ops, right? Like even when AI ops came on the screen, it really was just about taking more and making it more manageable and turning it less. And you guys were some of the first people I've heard talk about AI ops as a way to become predictive and preventative in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the foundation of kind of the space is around that first problem, which is correlation, right? It's like you said, it's reducing the noise. And we worked really hard early on to kind of differentiate ourselves and building this true AI approach, but we've continued to kind of expand and to other areas, addressing other problems that our customers have. And you've mentioned one, which is, everyone wants to be predictive. Everyone wants to be more proactive. Every single organization Now you want to find problems or start to detect that there's going to be a problem and prevent it from being service affecting. But the reality is, because of the current approaches, when you have to write rules, companies have gone on this path where they suppress over 90% of the signal, right? Think of it in terms of what's visible to the operations center, or, if you're auto ticketing, the incidents, and you're suppressing 95% of the signal that's coming from the observability tools. Oftentimes it's potentially a lower severity alarm, or it's a threshold violation. Maybe sometimes you don't create the ticket until it's failed 3 consecutive polls, right? But it's all of that signal that's being hidden that today has forced everyone down this path of being reactive. So, because we've been able to basically correlate without having to write rules or use tags or a topology, we're able to open that up and look at all of the signal, right? So that we're able to be more proactive and predictive. That's one way that we've looked at predictive, but there are other ways as well. So because in Grok, we first formed the detection through our unsupervised clustering algorithm. Then we apply a second algorithm, a classification algorithm that labels that so that we know what the problem is, how many times it's happened in the past, and how it was fixed. And that label is actually a prediction. So as soon as we recognize the state of the problem, we can apply a label with a probability of the final state that allows you to be predictive and look to go prevent that. Hey, I've got 3 low severity alarms that I've grouped, but I know that historically when these 3 alarms fire, ultimately there's an incident that gets created with some type of a fix action, right? So that's the second way we can be predictive. And then the third way is actually it's almost looking at the patterns of the incidents that get created, right? So Grok has a problem queue that looks at the issues that have occurred most often in your environment in the last 30 days. And we can identify those things, and basically we'll pick up on patterns that say, hey, every day at 4 o'clock, this group of alarms fires, an incident gets created, someone starts working that. We don't know that it happened yesterday and the day before and the day before at 4 o'clock, but we build a prediction model around predicting those incidents from, and think of it as a problem, right? So that's another way we can be predictive.
So I like I certainly, I mean, obviously I like that approach and the concept of shifting it from reacting to problem. I mean, that's the whole dark knock zero ticket IT that we've been talking about for a while now, is the ability to stop creating reactive work and start getting in front of it. So I guess I kind of want to talk, I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but I'd love to talk about like the piece that I think that's really interesting is that explainability and trust. I mean, we've, like, every customer that I talk to nowadays, this concept of like, how far do I trust AI? I don't trust it farther than I can throw my laptop, and then like, who do I blame when the AI breaks? And I think the interesting thing is, the best customers that I've seen take this approach kind of use like a multi-pronged approach to this, right? There are things that we know and trust AI to go and do for us. Like they're the things that we would trust anyone to go and do, right? Restarting services, the non-destructive changes of the world, right? But I think the cool thing about the approach of automation and AI ops together is that you can kind of take that multi-pronged approach of AI action as well as like AI empowered human in the loop action, right? And so you can drive to, these are the things that have happened, these are the types of things, and then you can still have automations to go fix it, but let the human kind of do that processing and push the button and do some validation before that happens. I guess, from my perspective, I see this a lot more from the automation side of it because of what Resolve does, but I'd love to hear, like, how do you work with your customers to gain that expandability and that trust, like that whole concept of, I need that one neck to choke or someone's neck to choke, and when AI is doing it, like, whose neck do I choke? Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
So here's the way I think about it. I think, if we look out, you look forward 10 years, it's scary, but we are going to have agents operating in these environments that recognize problems and run automations, right? It's going to happen. There's no question. The technology's there, but it's going to take time, and a lot of that time is going to be helping our customers become more comfortable, and trust the environment, right? So how do we deliver that together? And we've taken this approach where we think of it in terms of baby steps, right? So if I present to an operator an issue that's currently happening, and I can show them the exact same alarms have happened 10 times historically, and all 10 times it resulted in an incident, and all 10 incidents, they had to restart the service, then they're going to start building trust. And it starts with something as simple as oftentimes auto ticketing, right? Do I want to automatically create an incident? I don't want to do that because I'm going to push all the noise into the incidents. They're going to be mad at me. So, we provide this in our platform, the ability to kind of, to walk as fast as you want to walk, but to start off in a simplified approach, providing all of the analytics, all of, the collective wisdom from our AI and also the decisions that our customers have made historically so that they can, initially, maybe they're going to make the decision to manually attach an automation to a problem that they've seen in the past, right? That's step one, or even run automations from the UI as an operator as they're troubleshooting a problem or triaging a problem. But as time goes on and they build confidence through the data that's being provided, the more and more of that will be fully automated. So I guess
Yeah, I
that's
mean, I think that's yeah. I think that concept of like don't boil the ocean is so relevant here, right? I mean, if you've got things that you're automating today and you can whether it's the simple things like service restarts or whether it's more complicated things where like going out and running troubleshooting health checks and bringing all that information or bringing the war room together, right? Like if you've got some of that today, you can tie that into some of the AI ops processes. And if you don't have it today, you can start to build it and start to build those things like, listen, every time this happens, these are the things I do. Let's have the automation do that for me, and that way I'm further down the process or the path, or in the best cases I've fixed my own issue without needing to bring a tiger team together to do that kind of stuff. So
you got it.
yeah. So I guess this gets to be the fun part, right? I mean, obviously we're both very passionate about this because we both do sides of this today, and we've got a great partnership where Grok and Resolve kind of come together. So let's kind of walk through. I know we've got some slides that talk through like what does this look like in practice today? How does this how do we bring the AI ops and observability and visualization of the your environment and alerts and alarms and ticket history? How do we bring that along with my action arm and kind of like tie them together? So this is kind of a little bit of a how do we get started approach. So you want to walk us through the next couple of uh, kind of slides and how this comes together and talk us through what this looks like from the Grok to Resolve perspective today?
But definitely. So it all starts for us in what we call Grok Connect. It's our in our UI. It's how we set up integrations, and you can see, in the top, we have observability integrations, CMDB incident management, basically, change management. There'll be a tab for any of the integrations that are available, and then we have our automation tab. So here I've selected the automation tab, and you can see that we have an integration into Resolve, or Resolve is available for us to connect. And it's as simple as, if you'll go to the next slide, once I select configure, all we have to do is set up the connection to Resolve. And then once this is set up, we have access to the API, and it's bidirectional, right? So we'll pull all the automations available to us back into the Grok platform so that now we can operationalize them. And we do that through a number of different kind of mechanisms. But that's kind of step one. And then as these automations get kicked off, as Grok has a trigger, it calls the automation, Resolve runs the automation, it can store the results. We may also store the results or post the results of the automation, the incident as well.
Yeah,
And then
this is one of my favorite things. I mean, this is where you and I have talked about this in process. Like as a lot of the competitors try to do automation, you're either having to like build them in their tool or like write custom API calls and put hard coding all the parameters that you want to pass to the whatever ticketing system or tool that you're integrating with. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about our integration is that it goes and gets the automations, and then you can see here pulls back the variables and parameters that you need so that you can very easily map them without having to have like a developer involved or some hard knowledge of writing custom API calls back and forth. So
yeah, it's really about, for this integration, this partnership, the reason it works so well is because it's about operationalizing kind of the full value, right? And historically, back when I was at Resolve in the day, that one of the biggest challenges was it's always, what do we automate next? And you identify some use cases, you go build those, but now together, we provide a roadmap, we provide kind of this framework where they don't all have to be big automations. The little things oftentimes add up too. You're running thousands of automations a day, running triage, health checks, like you said. It's not all about fixing the problem. That's ultimately where we want to get, but there's so much more we can do with a tight integration where we can, work closely together to just, drive so much automation. And this really kind of comes back to what I was saying before around kind of those baby steps, right? Out of the gate, we don't want to just turn this thing on and say, hey, go automate, because customers are scared of that. But we want to give them the decision. We want them to be able to decide every time this type of an alarm comes in, run an automation, or every time Grok identifies a problem, recognizes a problem, that's happened 100 times in the past. In the future, if that happens, run this automation. So they're making the decision, right? So it's kind of step one is we want to give them the ability. And, if I'm an operator working a problem, or if I'm someone proactively looking back at issues that have been occurring, to assign automations or manually initiate automations. And then after, a customer starts gaining confidence in the platform and trust in the platform, and they're running more of these automations, then we're learning, right? We're learning so that together we can recommend automations next. So once after we recommend automations, longer term, we want to be able to build enough confidence where, our agent basically sees an issue, and because it's seen that problem happen enough, can initiate an automation and just run the automation, right? So that kind of talks about where we're going, but this is the starting point, and this is how we help our customers build confidence.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we tease this out a little bit because I think we're talking about it again in a couple slides, but I think, that's one of my favorites is that, like, anytime you make this, at Resolve, we're big on frameworks, and we've talked about our, capabilities framework about like building on things, and I think we're talking about that later, but also the flywheel is like super important to me. I think that the comment that you made about lots of people start with like, where do I even start, right? Like, how do I eat this elephant? And that's like a very tough conversation. And my favorite part about this integration with Grok is that it literally does give you a backlog that you can start to make progress and chip away at. And even if you don't know what you don't know today, and you start just building automations to go and automatically do the health checks and go pull back information, as you learn, those health checks can then become, build into automations that are taking action, and you can start to do the non-destructive actions. And then by the time you're done with this, you've got an alert or alarm that Grok has seen and knows it's triggered something like this before. It automatically kicks off the workflow that you've associated to it, and that automation goes out and it does the health check, it does the non-destructive auto remediation steps, and then it comes back and it says, hey, listen, here's all of the things that I've done without you having to be involved. This needs a bigger action. And the cool part about that is once you have that bigger action, you can decide, do I want to automate that too? Or, do I want to put some conditions in that let me automate that next step? And I think like that's just the continually growing and learning and providing value. So yeah, I love that approach from both the platforms of, understanding what you have as a backlog, and then being able to iterate and build those in a constructive way as you learn more and understand more and experience more. So I know this is the screen that I wanted to get to and everyone wanted to get to. So this is kind of the meat of like, what you see when an alert or an alarm group comes in. So talk us through a little bit of what we see here, and kind of the, how does this lead to automation?
Yeah, definitely. So, Ari, we're super excited about this. I know, but this is kind of a new beta. This is our 5.0 release coming out mid-year, and we're getting unbelievable kind of feedback from our customers on this. This is really where we're kind of bringing in our Grok Guru LLM summaries as well. So I'm just going to kind of describe the page, and then how we're helping link to automation. So on the top left, you'll see that's kind of just it's a summary of the detection. A detection in Grok is basically it's a group of alarms that Grok sees as being related, right? So instead of us initiating an automation from a single alarm or a single event, we're going to initiate an automation from something, a group of alarms that gives us a pattern so that we know what that thing is. And then these next three sections, the detection summary, the identified root cause, and the recommended actions, this is the output of our LLM. We're training Grok Guru with a lot of contextual data about this problem. We're using the alarm summaries. We're using other data in the alarm. And then we bring in historical incident close notes. So in this case, you can see that these exact alarms have happened 4 times in the past and resulted in an incident. And those historical incident close notes or work notes are what tell us how this problem was resolved last time. So, by leveraging the alarm summaries, the historical incident kind of metadata, Grok is able to give you a really accurate kind of root cause and recommended action. And then on the right, you can see that, we let you enter work notes. You can now apply actions here, like acknowledge this problem, open the ticket, suppress the problem, soak it. Most importantly now, automation. right? So I click on the automation button and it gives me a contextual list of automations that are available to either triage this issue, run commands, simple, triage commands, run a health check, or, if possible, fix the problem, write a fix action. And, the operator, as they make the decision on the commands that they use, they may select multiple automations. We're capturing those results. We're capturing which automations are selected for each type of problem so that, again, in the future, once they're using this platform, we can start making recommendations.
Yeah, I think I mean that concept is what what we've been talking to for a while is how do we get from information to action as quickly as possible. And I love that this is, you can set up automations to kick off when these are detected, but then when there are new detections or things you haven't experienced before or things you need to go and understand better, you've got the ability to kick off those automations as part of a human guided experience straight from this kind of detection summary page. And I know we've talked about it a lot. I love the timeline of events below. I mean, I think that's like one of my favorite things because this is one of the steps I think that are I hear customers missing all the time. And we've talked about this, right? Is like it's great that you're solving problems as you get outages, but if you have a way to understand the events leading up to that outage, you understand the timeline leading up to that outage, and you can take action that prevents you from ever having that critical alarm again, that's where there's value. And so, like, this is where I think, or that's where the value is. Maybe I should say there's value in both sides. That's where the value is, like, force multiplied, right? Because now you're preventing outages instead of doing a better job of automating and self-healing. You're actually preventing your teams from ever getting to the point where they're having those degradations in services or outages. And so, like, I love this concept of not only do you have this here, you have that the timeline of events and detection and understanding, like, hey, each time this happens, you get a high CPU utilization warn at 3 hours before this happens, and then you have the critical outage within 2 to 3 hours. Like, that's actionable information, right? So now you can shift the experience back from, like, let's solve this problem when we have a warn, let's take action and automate the warn so that we don't ever get a critical outage. And so I think, like, this is such an empowering tool for teams to be able to start to look back at, hey, look, we're really good at dealing with these when they happen. Now, how do we start preventing these? And how do we start building in that backlog to make sure that we have self-healing events as preventative actions instead of just responsive actions?
Yeah.
So,
One more quick thing too, Ari, I want to add.
yeah.
Um, because not everyone realizes this, but across our customer base, on average, 75% of the incidents that get created today, the exact same thing has happened three or more times in the past, right? So when we look at kind of the data that I'm providing here, and customers oftentimes are skeptical until we're actually deployed, but they just don't know it. I mean, oftentimes these operation centers are working the same things day after day, and they're already so busy because of this massive amount of noise, because of all the work that's being required of them, that a different operator picks it up every other third or fourth day, so they don't realize it's the same things happening again and again and again and again. So for us, for you and I, that's low hanging fruit, right? So
Absolutely.
step one for us needs to be, when we go into these accounts, thinking about how can we, those things that have happened in the past where we have closed notes and how that issue was resolved, or maybe we even found out that, someone started working it and the alarms cleared. All of that stuff we should be able to peel back, and then the problem gets fun, right? Then we're inferring, then we're learning from the automations. But to me, there's this mountain of low hanging fruit for us in accounts, as we kind of go after this approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right in that. Like, that's where you start to peel back the layers of the onion and really get to that backlog of things to make a transformative experience for your IT teams. Um, so I know this next screen is kind of the next level of above the individual detection, but like kind of the problem queue that you were referring to. Talk us through a little bit of, like, what does this look like? And I mean, again, you can see on the screen how easy it is to add an automation to this. I think that's obviously, I'm a little biased. That's one of my favorite pieces of this screen for sure.
Yeah, me too. So this basically is, this queue provides a list of I'm going to call them problems, of the incidents that have occurred most often in the last 30 days, right? So these are all, so think of these as detections that where we've grouped the exact same problem. So if you look in the kind of where you can, focus on the yellow and orange, the column there where it says priority, and then just to the right of that, you have an ID. That's an ID that Grok provides to detections when they have the exact same alarms, same exact symptoms, right? It's the same thing happening again and again. And you can see in this environment, the first ID has happened 145 times. I'm not talking about one or two times historically. This is really common where these issues have happened hundreds of times over a 6-month period, right? And if you tackle, the top 20 of them with automation, then you've reduced thousands of incidents, right? So, and the interesting thing again, where kind of Grok gurus coming in now, when we started down this path, we would, if a detection, let's say that detection has grouped 5 alarms, and that's happened 100 times in the last 6 months, and 90 times it resulted in incidents, we basically bring all of that incident metadata in to this queue so that we can roll it up and say, we know the category, we know the subcategory, all the structured data, the root cause, the closed code, that was easy. But the unstructured data, we would have to kind of manually go through and determine what were the fix actions in these previous 90 occurrences. Well, now we can leverage our Grok Guru summary. And that's where you see here, I'm summarizing the problem and also providing recommended actions for every one of these. So now imagine being, in one of these operation centers, and it's your job to drive efficiency through automation back into the operation center so that the team has less to work on, right? This is an automation. This is basically an automation pipeline, right? You can go through each one of these, and maybe not every case it's going to require a fix action. Sometimes it may be that the alarms are clearing. Other times, maybe it's just you want to go collect data and store it. But you'll see in many of these examples where it's restart a service, it's you restart interfaces, it's shut down a route or whatever, right? Reprovision something. And that this becomes a really easy way for the platform owner, the team that owns kind of maybe it's the assignment group in the incident, or it's the tier 3 team that owns the application or the network or the mainframe, to kind of go through and look, hey, in the last week, what are the things that have happened most often that I can really tackle now, so that when those issues happen again, we've got an automation in place, and effectively it's a zero touch from an operator perspective.
Yeah, and this is super exciting to me because, I mean, as we've talked about a little bit, and some of the folks might have seen, we're working to improve our AI copilot that helps you build automations. And so the goal of this would be like, let's tie those recommended actions into the AI builder, the copilot, and now you've got recommended actions, and we've built the automation on the fly for you. And so that's something that, as these two releases come closer together, it'll be something that we'll obviously be looking at to deepen the value of these recommended actions and the ability to create those automations on the fly. So kind of kicking from here, I think this is where the power of the ability to assign and build automations and continue to grow those automations becomes more valuable. And those of you that have seen our platform before know the whole value of Resolve's workflows and Resolve's automations they are absolutely extensible and reusable, and give you the ability to take action on things like, in this example, restarting a RabbitMQ service, right? And so this can actually go all the way down to directly connecting to that node, and pulling all of those values from the Grok alarm, right? So in this case, the device you're SSHing to, the actual service you're restarting, all of that's passed over as a variable. This automation gets kicked off and actually takes the action, and then responds back and either updates Grok and updates your ServiceNow ticket or wherever you're tracking this alarm. And I think this is where I'll kind of tease into this, like, the building to value approach is, if you don't know how to solve some of these problems and you're getting these backlogs of Sentinel services that need to be restarted or bigger issues, your first steps to going and troubleshooting and understanding the actual problem, those all build. And that kind of builds on this framework that we've built on as an automation company for 15 years, is build and start solving the problems that are the repeatable toil things, right? The going and running the list of commands and seeing what the status of running services are, seeing what services are running, seeing what services are stopped or stalled or in a critical state. Those are things you already know today. You can automate that that. And then as you learn more, build more of those. Okay, now I know what services are stopped. Now I want to go restart those services. Well, you don't have to build another automation. It's not another script. It's just, adding to value to that. And this is where you start to get that kind of additive value as you grow and learn more and work through that backlog of things and get that trust and understanding of, I want these automations to take action on these alerts and alarms and information that I'm feeding back. And so I think that's how you build to these differentiated outcomes like the dark knock and zero ticket IT is by taking a bite of the elephant and deflecting the low hanging fruit first and using that to build and build energy and build momentum towards solving those other problems and those newly discovered problems and those newly discovered backlog items. So yeah, so that's kind of getting us to where you can learn more, get to know more about Resolve and about Grok. You can definitely reach out to us either at resolve.io or at Grokstream, again, where we've got a great relationship as trusted partners. And there's tons of content on both of our YouTube's pages as well, to see some of the platforms in action. And then certainly if there are any questions, I'd love to answer some questions. All right, Josh, this one's probably for you. What advice would you give for adopting AIOps and automation for hybrid and legacy environments? I've got some thoughts here too, but I'll let you go first on that one.
So, I mean, so today that's typical, right? Hybrid and legacy, that's a typical environment. So, when I think about adopting, I would, you need to engage with one or multiple vendors and do the analysis. For us, the process is very easy, right? Our integration with Resolve is easy. Typically what we do is, when a customer is interested in looking and at least feeling out adoption, then we'll do a pilot. And we love to do pilots. We do them for free. Oftentimes they're live, right? We set up an integration to your observability tools and to your incident management platform with zero kind of impact to your current operations. And, within, a couple of weeks, you're gonna see value and be able to see how we can transform your environment.
Yeah, so I think I was just having this conversation yesterday. I think the concept of like legacy environments holding people back from AI ops and automation is a misnomer. I think that is the kind of the thought process of yesteryear, like when it was just correlation and everything needed an API to go talk to. That's one of my favorite parts about Grok and Resolve together is like, when I first started at Resolve 4 years ago, one of the first use cases I actually worked on with a customer that they were struggling with was they had a mainframe that dumped a flat file out to an SFTP folder, and they needed to use that information as part of a process. And so they currently had someone like swivel chairing and going and grabbing that and putting that information in a ticket, and then the ticket kicked off an automation. And we were like, you don't have to do that. You can literally build an automation to go pick up that file, take action, drop a new information in another flat file, and that mainframe can pick that up and run it. So I think like the concept of legacy stack being a painful piece to this is really it's about like how you're approaching the problem. You may not solve it in the traditional way, but with the ability to see those systems, pass that information, historical ticket records and historical solves to problems into Grok and correlating those in, plus the ability of Resolve to reach out to any system, command line, directly SSH connecting, dropping a flat file in an SFTP folder. You can really like give APIs to systems that have never had that ability to be involved in a process before. And so I think, that's one of my, my favorite kind of misnomers is like that it's actually, if you can understand the process, you can likely build an automation to, solve, remediate, get additional information, even on incredibly legacy stack items. So, I think the first part is, start at what but what's the process that you're interacting with today, and then, build that and build up from there. So another great question: how do you recommend starting to assess where we are currently, and where we are on the automation maturity framework? Well, I'll take this one. I think the automation maturity framework isn't about necessarily just maturity. I mean, you certainly want to build towards the more differentiated business outcomes. But I think the best way to approach this is like, do you understand the processes that are cross-functional processes, that are business processes? And when you have an understanding of what these are, then understanding where you're using automation today. So like, one of my favorite examples is onboarding and offboarding of new systems, right? When you're creating a new system, you've got to create the infrastructure, build the network rules, put it into firewalls, build routes for those devices. Lots of customers have automations that do those things individually, but they don't piece them together to build that differentiated business outcome, right? They don't build it for that entire onboarding process. And so what I would say is like, start from what you know, start from the things that you know that you've got, automating those automating those things that are high volume things that you're experiencing, and then start to bring those together and build towards your more differentiated business outcomes. And that's a great way to make sure you're adding value today and building towards that more differentiated value. Anything, I don't know, Josh, if there was anything you wanted to add or any thoughts you had around that.
I think you covered that well.
So I've got one other question. I think we're just at time, but one other question that came up was, what's the biggest misconception about AIOps today? That's a good one. So I figured I'd drop it in here. I think I'll let you give a first stab. I think we covered a lot of that in the biggest pitfalls, but yeah, what do you think the biggest misconception of AIOps today is?
I think there's this misconception that people like they don't think they're mature enough. Our data is not good enough. We don't have great ticketing data. And it's just that's not the case. They want to, everyone's fear is like, let's wait, let's wait. And from my perspective, it's like there's no reason to wait. I haven't walked into an opportunity where we haven't been able to provide value, right? So if you have a pain and you're looking to identify and fix problems, faster and autonomously, then, to me, there's, you don't have to be mature, So I think maybe with some of the other approaches that are out there, it's a requirement to be more mature, to have mature data, to have better ticketing data, but for it's not. So that's probably the one that I see.
Yeah, I like that. I think I also think that also adds credence to like, if you just get started and you start feeding the data you have in and building off of that, I think you'll be surprised how fast you will mature. Like, starting the process is a much faster process to maturity than trying to get all of your ducks in a row and all of your systems and all of your monitoring clean, and like, because starting somewhere and learning is a journey. So like, just take that first step and get started, and you'll see that maturity comes, pretty quickly along with that. So, well, I'm sure there are probably some other good questions out there. Please feel free to reach out to us, and to the teams. And thanks everybody for joining us today. I appreciate Josh taking the time, and for all of you guys taking the time to talk AIOps with us.